Dr. Sarah Martinez had seen everything in her 15 years at Denver Veterans Medical Center. Brain injuries that rewired personalities overnight. Soldiers who woke up speaking different languages after trauma. Amputees who felt phantom pain, so intense it drove them to tears. But nothing in her extensive medical training had prepared her for what happened on that Tuesday morning in October. She was making her routine rounds when she heard the sound of claws clicking against the hospital's polished linoleum floors. The rhythm was urgent, purposeful, unlike the casual patting of therapy dogs she was accustomed to. When she turned around, she saw a German shepherd whose entire body language spoke of desperate anticipation. This was Ranger, though Dr. Martinez wouldn't learn his name for another few minutes. What she witnessed next would become the most profound moment of her medical career. She instinctively reached for her phone and captured something that would later touch millions of lives around the world. But first, she had to understand the extraordinary story that brought a wounded warrior and his faithful companion to this moment of reckoning. Dr. Sarah Martinez had dedicated her life to understanding trauma. At 42, she possessed the rare combination of clinical expertise and emotional intelligence that made her invaluable to the Veterans Medical Center. Her own father had served in Vietnam, returning home with invisible wounds that took decades to heal. That personal connection drove her relentless pursuit of innovative treatment methods for PTSD and traumatic brain injury. Her office walls were lined with thank you letters from former patients, photographs from military ceremonies, and medical journals featuring her research on animal-assisted therapy. She had published 3 papers on the neurological benefits of service animals, but all her academic knowledge paled in comparison to what she was about to witness firsthand. That morning she had arrived at 6:30 a.m., as was her custom. Her first patient, Sergeant Mike Torres, was scheduled for a psychological evaluation at 9 a.m. Mike had been under her care for 3 months, ever since his transfer from Walter Reed Medical Center. His file made for difficult reading. IED explosion, traumatic amputation of left arm, mild traumatic brain injury, severe PTSD, and what the reports clinically termed complicated grief over separation from his military working dog. Dr. Martinez had worked with hundreds of veterans, but Mike's case troubled her deeply. His depression scores were among the highest she'd encountered, and his progress in adapting to his prosthetic limb had plateaued. During their sessions, he spoke frequently about Ranger, his German shepherd partner, with a combination of love and devastating guilt. "I failed him," Mike would repeat. "He trusted me to keep him safe, and I failed him." What Dr. Martinez didn't know was that today would mark the beginning of both their healing journeys. Sergeant Michael Antonio Torres had grown up in a small town outside San Antonio, Texas, where his grandmother raised him after his parents died in a car accident when he was 12. Maria Torres, a woman of infinite patience and fierce pride, had taught him that loyalty was the most sacred virtue. "Mijo," she would say, "your word is your bond, and your heart is your compass. Never forget that." Mike enlisted in the Army at 19, not out of patriotic fervor, but because he needed purpose and direction. The military gave him both. He excelled in training, showed natural leadership abilities, and volunteered for every challenging assignment. But it wasn't until he was selected for the military working dog program that he found his true calling. The first time Mike met Ranger at Lackland Air Force Base, the 6-month-old German shepherd had just failed out of explosive detection training. For being too gentle, the instructors considered this a weakness, but Mike saw it differently. During their initial bonding session, Ranger approached him with unusual caution, studying Mike's face before carefully placing his head against the soldier's leg. It was a moment of mutual recognition that would define both their lives. Their training together was intensive and transformative, Mike learned to read Ranger's subtlest signals. The slight tilt of his ears that indicated uncertainty. The specific way his tail moved when he detected something suspicious. The almost imperceptible change in his gait when he was tired, but pushing through anyway. In return, Ranger learned to interpret Mike's moods, offering comfort during nightmares and providing silent companionship during Mike's difficult phone calls home to his aging grandmother. Their first deployment to Afghanistan cemented their bond. Ranger's gentle nature, initially seen as a liability, proved to be his greatest asset. Children in villages weren't afraid of him, and his calm demeanor helped de-escalate tense situations with civilians. More importantly, his nose was extraordinary. He could detect buried explosives with an accuracy that surpassed even the most experienced dogs in their unit. Over 18 months and 2 deployments, Mike and Ranger completed over 200 missions together. They found and disarmed 27 improvised explosive devices, potentially saving hundreds of lives. Mike kept a mental tally, not out of pride, but out of gratitude for Ranger's incredible abilities. "He's not just my partner," Mike would tell other handlers. "He's the reason I'm still alive." But their perfect partnership was about to face its ultimate test. October 15th, 2023, started like any other patrol day in Kandahar province. Mike woke at 0500 hours to find Ranger already alert, sitting by the entrance to their shared tent with that particular focus that meant he sensed something in the air. Mike had learned to trust these instincts completely. "What is it, boy?" Mike asked, running his hand along Ranger's neck to check his tension level. The dog's muscles were coiled but not panicked, alert, not alarmed. It was a distinction Mike had learned to recognize after months of partnership. Their mission that day was routine. Accompany a convoy delivering medical supplies to a remote outpost. Intelligence reports suggested minimal threat levels. But Mike knew better than to trust intelligence reports completely. He double-checked Ranger's protective vest, ensuring the fit was snug but not restrictive, and packed extra water for both of them. The Afghan heat could be brutal, especially for a German shepherd whose thick coat was designed for cooler climates. The convoy consisted of 4 vehicles, 2 armored trucks carrying supplies, 1 carrying personnel, and their lead vehicle equipped with specialized IED detection equipment. Mike and Ranger rode in the lead vehicle, which was both an honor and a responsibility. They were the convoy's primary defense against buried explosives. For the first 3 hours, the mission proceeded without incident. Ranger performed his usual checks at suspicious locations, areas where the road surface looked disturbed, places where insurgents might hide explosives. His behavior was calm and professional, giving the all-clear signal at each stop. But as they entered a narrow valley approximately 15 kilometers from their destination, Ranger's demeanor changed. His ears shot forward, his body tensed, and he began the low, insistent whining that Mike recognized as his strongest alert signal. This wasn't a routine detection. This was urgent. "Stop the convoy," Mike radioed immediately. "Ranger's giving his highest level alert." The vehicles halted and Mike prepared to investigate with Ranger. Standard protocol required him to approach slowly, allowing Ranger to pinpoint the exact location of the threat. But as they exited the vehicle, Ranger did something he had never done before in all their missions together. He refused to move forward. Instead, the dog pressed himself against Mike's legs, looking up at his handler with an expression Mike had never seen before. It wasn't fear exactly, but something deeper. A desperate communication that transcended their usual working relationship. Ranger was trying to tell him something, but Mike couldn't understand what. "What is it, buddy?" Mike knelt beside Ranger, studying the dog's face for clues. "What are you seeing that I'm not?" In retrospect, Mike would realize that Ranger had detected something unprecedented. Not just one improvised explosive device, but a complex network of them, probably triggered by a single detonator. The dog's extraordinary nose had picked up traces of explosives in multiple locations, creating a sensory overload that his training hadn't prepared him for. Mike made the decision that would haunt him forever. Trusting his equipment over his dog's instincts, he decided to proceed with the standard detection protocol. "Come on, boy," he said, gently encouraging Ranger forward. "Let's clear this area and get everyone home safe." Ranger reluctantly complied, his body language screaming reluctance with every step. They had moved approximately 30 meters from the convoy when the world exploded. The blast was so powerful that it lifted their entire vehicle off the ground. Mike's last coherent memory was the sight of Ranger being thrown through the air, his body tumbling like a rag doll against the rocky terrain. Then everything went black. When Mike regained consciousness, he was lying on his back in the dust, his ears ringing so loudly he couldn't hear his own screams. The first thing he tried to do was move his left arm to push himself up. Nothing happened. He looked down and saw something that his brain refused to process. His sleeve was torn and bloody, but there was nothing inside it. "Ranger!" The name tore from his throat, though he couldn't hear his own voice. "Ranger!" Through the smoke and chaos, he saw a flash of tan and black fur. Ranger was alive, limping but moving, and he was fighting his way through the debris toward Mike. The dog's left rear leg was clearly injured, but his determination was absolute. When Ranger reached him, the dog collapsed beside Mike, pressing his warm body against his handler's right side. Mike could feel the dog's rapid breathing, could see the pain in his brown eyes. But Ranger didn't move. Even injured, even terrified, he stayed with Mike. The medics had to physically separate them when the helicopter arrived. Mike's last sight, before losing consciousness, was Ranger's desperate face as strangers carried his handler away. Mike's recovery was a journey through multiple layers of hell. The physical rehabilitation was brutal, learning to balance without his dominant arm, retraining his brain to operate a complex prosthetic device, dealing with phantom pain that felt like his missing hand was being crushed in a vice. But the emotional trauma was infinitely worse. In his hospital bed at Walter Reed, Mike experienced nightmares that felt more real than his waking hours. He would dream that he was still in Afghanistan, still hearing Ranger's desperate whining, still making the decision to move forward despite his dog's warnings. He would wake up screaming Ranger's name, reaching with his prosthetic arm to comfort a dog who wasn't there. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, his psychiatrist at Walter Reed, diagnosed him with severe PTSD complicated by what she termed interspecies grief, a condition she'd observed in military dog handlers separated from their animals. "Your bond with Ranger goes beyond typical human-animal relationships," she explained during one particularly difficult session. "You functioned as a single unit, and now part of that unit is missing. Your brain is processing this as a partial death." Mike's grandmother, now 86 and using a wheelchair herself, made the journey from Texas to visit him whenever possible. Maria Torres would sit by his bed, holding his remaining hand while he slept, whispering prayers in Spanish. "Mijo," she would say during his lucid moments. "Your dog, he is waiting for you. Animals, they don't forget love." But Mike's guilt was consuming him. He had studied the blast site photographs, analyzed the incident report, and convinced himself that if he had listened to Ranger's warning, none of this would have happened. Not just his own injuries, but the fact that Ranger had been hurt too. That was unforgivable. What Mike didn't know was that Ranger was struggling just as much in his own way. The dog had been transferred to a military working dog facility in Virginia, where he received excellent medical care for his injured leg. Physically, he recovered completely. Emotionally, he was a different animal. Staff Sergeant Jennifer Kim, Ranger's temporary handler at the facility, noted dramatic changes in his behavior. The once confident, eager-to-work dog had become withdrawn and anxious. He would sit by the facility's gates for hours, watching for familiar faces that never came. During training exercises, he would perform his duties adequately but without enthusiasm, going through the motions like a robot. "He's grieving," a Staff Sergeant Kim wrote in her reports. Ranger shows classic signs of depression in military working. Dogs, decreased appetite, social withdrawal, reduced interest in activities he previously enjoyed. He needs to be reunited with his handler for both their psychological well-being. But the military bureaucracy moved slowly. Mike needed to be medically cleared for dog handling, which required not just physical recovery, but psychological stability. His PTSD symptoms made this challenging. Meanwhile, Ranger needed a handler, and there was pressure to either retire him or assign him to someone else. Dr. Martinez first encountered Mike's case file when he was transferred to Denver Veterans Medical Center for specialized prosthetic training. His previous psychiatrists had noted his obsessive concern about Ranger's well-being. But Dr. Martinez saw something different in Mike's fixation. She recognized it as a form of anchored love, the kind of deep emotional bond that could either destroy someone or heal them completely, depending on how it was handled. During their first session, Mike was barely functional. He sat in her office staring at his prosthetic hand, opening and closing the mechanical fingers with a repetitive motion that spoke of deep psychological distress. "Tell me about Ranger," Dr. Martinez said simply. For the first time in months, Mike looked up, his eyes filled with tears as he began to speak about his dog. And Dr. Martinez realized she was witnessing something extraordinary. A love so pure and profound that it transcended species, trauma, and physical separation. That's when she began, fighting the system to arrange their reunion. Dr. Martinez had been working for 6 weeks to arrange this meeting. The paperwork alone was staggering. Medical clearances, psychological evaluations, facility permissions, transportation arrangements. But she had seen too many veterans lose hope to let bureaucracy stand in the way of healing. Mike had been preparing for this moment with an intensity that worried his medical team. He had been practicing with his prosthetic arm obsessively, determined to be able to pet Ranger properly when they met. He had also been spiraling into deeper anxiety, terrified that Ranger wouldn't accept him as he was now. "What if he doesn't recognize me?" Mike had asked during their session the day before. "What if I smell different because of the medications? What if the prosthetic scares him? What if he associates me with what happened that day?" Dr. Martinez had tried to reassure him, but honestly, she shared some of his concerns. Animal psychology wasn't her specialty, and she couldn't predict how Ranger would react to seeing Mike's altered condition. That Tuesday morning, Dr. Martinez arrived at the hospital earlier than usual. She wanted to observe Mike's baseline anxiety levels before Ranger arrived. She found him in the physical therapy room at 6 a.m., working alone with his prosthetic arm, practicing movements that would allow him to pet a dog naturally. "Good morning, Mike," she said softly, not wanting to startle him. He looked up and she could see the fear in his eyes. "I keep thinking about that morning," he said quietly, the way he looked at me when he didn't want to move forward. He knew Dr. Martinez. He knew something was wrong, and I didn't listen. What if he doesn't trust me anymore? Dr. Martinez sat beside him on the therapy bench. "Mike, what happened that day wasn't your fault. You made the best decision you could, with the information you had. But more importantly, you need to trust the bond you built with Ranger. That kind of love doesn't just disappear because of trauma." At 8:30 a.m., Dr. Martinez received the call she'd been waiting for. Ranger had arrived with his escort, Staff Sergeant Kim, who had volunteered to make the journey from Virginia because she'd grown fond of the dog during his stay at her facility. "How is he?" Dr. Martinez asked as they spoke in the parking lot. "Anxious," Staff Sergeant Kim replied. "Honestly, He's been restless since we started the journey yesterday. I think he senses something is happening, but I'm not sure he understands what. He's lost weight and he's more withdrawn than when he first arrived. At our facility, Dr. Martinez studied Ranger through the car window. The German Shepherd was sitting perfectly still in the back seat, but his ears were constantly moving, processing every sound around him. His coat looked healthy, but there was something different in his posture. A wariness that spoke of emotional, wounds that matched his handlers. "Let's take him to the secure entrance," Dr. Martinez suggested. "I want to minimize the stress of unfamiliar surroundings before we get to Mike." As they walked through the hospital corridors, Dr. Martinez noticed how Ranger's behavior changed. The dog's head began to lift, his nostrils flaring as he processed the institutional smells around him. Medical facilities have a distinctive odor, antiseptic mixed with industrial cleaning products, and something indefinably human. But there was something else in the air that Ranger was detecting, something that made his entire body tense with anticipation. Mike's scent. After 8 months of separation, Ranger was picking up traces of his handler's presence in the air circulation system. The dog's pace quickened, his tail beginning to show the first signs of movement since they'd arrived. Dr. Martinez felt her heart racing. This was either going to be one of the most beautiful reunions she'd ever witnessed, or one of the most heartbreaking moments of her career. Mike was sitting on the edge of his hospital bed when Dr. Martinez knocked on his door. He had been awake since 4 a.m., unable to sleep, alternating between desperate anticipation and paralyzing fear. He had changed clothes 3 times, worried that Ranger might not recognize his scent if he wore something new. "Mike, are you ready?" Dr. Martinez asked gently. He looked up at her with eyes that held 8 months of accumulated pain, hope, and terror. "I don't know if I'll ever be ready," he admitted. "But I need to see him." Dr. Martinez had positioned herself strategically in the room where she could observe both Mike and Ranger without interfering. She had her phone ready, though at that moment she was thinking more about documentation for Mike's treatment than about capturing a viral moment. The door opened, and Staff Sergeant Kim entered first. "He's been pulling toward this room for the last 50 feet, she said quietly. "I think he knows." Then Ranger appeared in the doorway, and time seemed to stop. The dog was beautiful, his coat gleaming, his posture alert, every line of his body speaking of controlled power and intelligence. But it was his eyes that Dr. Martinez found most striking. They held an intensity she had rarely seen in any animal, a focus that seemed to penetrate straight to the soul. Ranger's gaze swept the room and locked onto Mike. For a moment, both of them were completely still, as if they were processing something beyond ordinary recognition. Mike's voice, when he finally spoke, was barely audible. "Hey, buddy." Those 2 words seemed to unlock something in Ranger. The dog's ears shot forward, his head tilted slightly, and Dr. Martinez could see him processing not just the sound of Mike's voice, but everything that had changed about his handler's appearance. Mike looked different, thinner, older somehow, marked by months of pain and recovery. His hair was shorter, military regulation cut grown out unevenly. His left sleeve hung differently, and there was something artificial about the way his left arm rested at his side. But more than the physical changes, Ranger was detecting something else. The scent of medications, the lingering traces of medical procedures, and underneath it all, the familiar essence that meant home, safety, and love. Ranger took 1 careful step into the room, then another. His movements were cautious but purposeful, and Dr. Martinez realized she was holding her breath. "Come here, Ranger," Mike said, and this time his voice was stronger. "It's me, boy. It's really me." Instead of running to Mike as she might have expected, Ranger began to circle the bed slowly, systematically gathering information. He was using all of his senses, sight, sound, and most importantly, smell. to confirm what his heart was telling. Him, Dr. Martinez, watched this process with fascination. This wasn't just a dog recognizing his owner. This was a sophisticated intelligence, making sense of a complex situation. Ranger was processing Mike's changed condition with the same methodical approach he had once used to detect explosives. When Ranger completed his circuit of the room, he approached Mike directly but stopped about 3 feet away. Dr. Martinez could see the conflict in the dog's posture, the desire to reconnect warring with uncertainty about these new circumstances. Mike's eyes filled with tears. "I know I'm different, buddy," he said softly. "I know I'm not the same as I was before, but I'm still me underneath all this. I'm still your handler, your partner." He slowly extended his right hand, palm up, in a gesture Ranger would remember from thousands of training sessions. It was their signal for, "Come closer, it's safe." Ranger studied the offered hand, then looked up at Mike's face. Whatever he saw there seemed to reassure him, because he took another step forward, then another, until he was within touching distance. What happened next took everyone in the room by surprise. Instead of allowing Mike to pet him, Ranger began his own investigation. He gently sniffed Mike's right hand, confirming the familiar scent. Then, with infinite care, he moved to Mike's left side and began to examine the prosthetic arm. Dr. Martinez watched in amazement as Ranger's nose traced the length of the artificial limb. From shoulder to fingertips, the dog showed no fear, no revulsion, only intense curiosity and what seemed like understanding. "He's figuring it out," Mike whispered, tears streaming down his face. "He's trying to understand what happened to me." Ranger completed his examination of the prosthetic and then did something that made Dr. Martinez immediately reach for her phone. The dog gently placed his right front paw on Mike's artificial hand, looking up at his handler's face as if to say, "I understand. This is part of you now." The symbolism of the moment was overwhelming. A dog who had lost his handler's touch was literally reaching out to reconnect with the artificial hand that would replace what had been lost. Mike's composure completely shattered. He leaned forward and wrapped his right arm around Ranger's neck, burying his face in the familiar fur. "I'm sorry, buddy," he sobbed. "I'm so sorry I didn't listen to you that day. I'm sorry I let you get hurt. I'm sorry I left you alone for so long." Ranger pressed against Mike, his tail beginning to wag slowly. But then he did something even more extraordinary. He carefully maneuvered himself so that Mike's prosthetic arm was resting across his back, and he settled into position as if he were physically supporting the artificial limb. Dr. Martinez realized she was witnessing something unprecedented in her medical career. This wasn't just emotional recognition. This was active acceptance and adaptation. Ranger was demonstrating that he not only accepted Mike's changed condition, but was prepared to help him navigate this new reality. "Look at that, Staff Sergeant," Kim whispered. "He's treating the prosthetic like it's a natural part of Mike. I've never seen anything like it." For the next 20 minutes, Dr. Martinez documented one of the most profound examples of interspecies healing she had ever encountered. Ranger systematically re-established his bond with Mike, investigating every aspect of his handler's changed condition, and apparently deciding that none of it mattered compared to their fundamental connection. When Mike tried to pet Ranger with his prosthetic hand, the dog not only accepted the touch but leaned into it, closing his eyes with the same contentment he had once shown when Mike's natural hand stroked his fur. "He doesn't care," Mike said wonderingly. "He really doesn't care that I'm different." Now, Dr. Martinez finally spoke up. "Mike, what you're experiencing is unconditional love in its purest form. Ranger isn't seeing you as damaged or different. He's seeing you as his partner, who has returned to him after a long absence. The prosthetic isn't a barrier to your relationship, it's just a new part of the man he loves." The video Dr. Martinez captured that day would later be viewed by millions of people around the world. But in that moment, she was thinking only of her patient and the incredible healing power of the bond she was witnessing. The weeks following their reunion marked a transformation in both Mike and Ranger that exceeded Dr. Martinez's most optimistic projections. Having Ranger by his side seemed to unlock something in Mike's recovery process that months of traditional therapy had failed to achieve. Within the first week, Mike's progress in physical therapy accelerated dramatically. Tasks that had seemed impossibly difficult with his prosthetic arm became manageable when Ranger was present as motivation. The dog seemed to intuitively understand Mike's limitations and adapted his behavior accordingly. During one particularly memorable session, Dr. Martinez observed Ranger helping Mike with a coordination exercise that involved picking up objects with his prosthetic hand. When Mike became frustrated with his lack of dexterity, Ranger would gently nudge the objects closer or position himself to provide emotional support. It was as if the dog had become a living, breathing piece of adaptive equipment. But the most significant changes were psychological. Mike's nightmares decreased in frequency and intensity. When they did occur, Ranger was there to provide immediate comfort, using his warm body weight to ground Mike in reality and help him distinguish between past trauma and present safety. Dr. Martinez began incorporating Ranger into Mike's therapy sessions, and the results were remarkable. Mike was more willing to discuss his trauma when Ranger was present, and he showed increased motivation to work on coping strategies. Most importantly, his sense of purpose began to return. "I need to be strong for him," Mike told Dr. Martinez during one session, gesturing to Ranger, who was lying calmly beside his chair. "He depends on me, and I can't let him down again." Dr. Martinez helped Mike reframe this perspective. "Mike, it's not about being strong for Ranger. It's about being partners again. He's not depending on you to be perfect. He's choosing to be with you because he loves you exactly as you are." The video Dr. Martinez had captured began circulating first within medical circles, then among veteran support groups, and eventually reached a much wider audience. The response was overwhelming. Veterans from around the world reached out to share their own stories of animal companions who had helped them through dark periods. What struck Dr. Martinez most about these responses was how universally people understood what they were seeing in the video. It wasn't just about a man and his dog. It was about the power of acceptance, the possibility of healing, and the truth that love transcends physical limitations. Mike and Ranger began visiting other wounded veterans at the hospital, and their impact was immediate and profound. Patients who had been struggling with their own disabilities saw in Mike's relationship with Ranger a model for moving forward. They witnessed a partnership that had been broken by trauma, but rebuilt into something even stronger. One patient, a young Marine who had lost both legs in an IED explosion, told Dr. Martinez, "Watching Mike and Ranger together showed me that my injuries don't have to define my relationships. If that dog can love Mike exactly as he is now, maybe other people can accept me too." Dr. Martinez realized that Mike and Ranger had become more than just a successful case study. They had become symbols of resilience and hope for the entire veteran community. 6 months after their reunion, Mike and Ranger had not only rebuilt their partnership, but had discovered a new purpose that neither could have imagined during their darkest moments of separation. They were formally certified as a therapy team, with Mike using his experience as a wounded veteran to provide peer support while Ranger offered the unique comfort that only animals can provide. Their work took them to hospitals, support groups, and rehabilitation centers throughout the region. Dr. Martinez often accompanied them on these visits, partly for professional interest, but mostly because she had become personally invested in their journey. She watched Mike transform from a broken man consumed by guilt into someone who radiated quiet strength and compassion. The irony, Mike told her one day, as they prepared for a visit to a new patient, is that losing my arm and Going through all that trauma brought Ranger and me closer than we ever were before. We understand each other on a level we never achieved when everything was normal." Dr. Martinez nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. Trauma, when properly processed and integrated, could indeed strengthen bonds rather than break them. Mike and Ranger were living proof of that principle. Ranger, too, had evolved beyond his original role as a military working dog. His gentle nature, once considered a weakness in explosive detection work, had become his greatest asset in therapy work. He seemed to possess an uncanny ability to sense which patients needed comfort, which ones needed space, and which ones were ready to take steps toward healing. During one visit, Dr. Martinez watched Ranger work with a young Army Ranger who had been struggling with severe depression following a traumatic brain injury. The patient had been unresponsive to traditional therapy approaches, barely speaking during sessions and showing no interest in social interaction. But when Ranger approached him, something shifted. The dog didn't try to force interaction. Instead, he simply lay down beside the man's wheelchair and waited. For 20 minutes, they sat in comfortable silence. Then, almost imperceptibly, the patient's hand moved toward Ranger's head. "That's the first voluntary movement he's made toward another being in 3 months," the patient's psychiatrist whispered to Dr. Martinez. These moments of breakthrough became routine in Mike and Ranger's therapy work. They had developed an intuitive understanding of trauma that transcended professional training. They knew firsthand what it felt like to have your world shattered and then slowly rebuilt, piece by piece. The video Dr. Martinez had captured continued to circulate, accumulating millions of views and thousands of comments from people who had been touched by the story. But for Dr. Martinez, the real measure of its impact wasn't in numbers. It was in the lives that had been changed by witnessing the power of unconditional love. She kept a copy of that video on her phone, and whenever she encountered a particularly difficult case or felt overwhelmed by the challenges of her work, she would watch it again. It reminded her why she had become a doctor in the first place, to facilitate moments of healing that transcended medical textbooks and touched the deepest parts of human experience. Mike and Ranger had taught her that sometimes the most powerful medicine couldn't be found in a pharmacy or learned in medical school. Sometimes healing came from the simple act of being accepted exactly as you are, flaws and scars included, by someone whose love knows no conditions or limitations. Their story had become a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the healing power of the bonds we form with the creatures who share our lives. It proved that trauma, while devastating, doesn't have to be defining. That it's possible to rebuild not just what was lost, but something even more beautiful and meaningful. As Dr. Martinez watched Mike and Ranger continue their work with other wounded veterans, she knew she was witnessing something rare and precious. A love story that had survived war, trauma, and separation to emerge stronger than ever. It was a reminder that in a world often marked by division and despair, the bonds of loyalty, acceptance, and unconditional love remain unbreakable. That Tuesday morning had changed 3 lives forever. Mike learned that he was still worthy of love despite his injuries. Ranger proved that loyalty transcends physical changes. And Dr. Martinez discovered that sometimes the most profound healing happens not through medical intervention, but through the simple power of a bond that refuses to be broken.